Hey book buddies, I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader. This is my second book prize video of the day. There's lots of book prizes announced at the beginning of March, just coincidentally, but the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction has just been announced, and I'm so excited, don't know where to begin. I'm sure as many of you saw, I made a predictions video with Anna James. So Anna and I picked 16 books each, so out of 32, there was a pretty good chance that we were going to get a number right, and we guessed 9 books correctly. So there were some that I was hoping for and rooting to see, and I'm so happy to see them on the list. And then there are other ones which are like a bit of a surprise, but I'm really delighted that they're on the list. And out of the 16 on the long list, I've read 10 of them, or like more accurately, I've read 9 3/4, because just coincidentally, I happen to be reading one of the books on the long list now. But first I want to talk about the two books which I'm so excited to see on the list, and that is Sight by Jessie Greengrass and A Boy in Winter by Rachel Seffert. And I'm particularly happy and excited about these, and actually these two copies, they complement each other well with the colors, don't they? But I'm so happy and excited about these ones in particular because these are two books that I just personally loved so much, and I just fell into the reading experience of them. It's incredible writing, and so it's wonderful to see them being honored. So Rachel Seffert is an experienced author. She's published several books, really high quality books. And A Boy in Winter is about a Ukrainian village during World War II, a really heartrending story. And then Sight is a much quieter, more meditative book about a woman reflecting on the experience of motherhood and really trying to understand how to transition from being a daughter and a granddaughter to being a mother herself, and understanding what that identity would mean for her and how she wants to try to impart on her child an independent way of looking at and being in the world. And she does this by looking at history and some different figures in history. I've talked about it a lot already. I made my whole video predicting that it'll win the Booker Prize for this year, and it may well win the Women's Prize for Fiction this year. But these are two really excellent novels that I would recommend you start with if you haven't read any of the books on the list. And then there is Nicola Barker's novel Happy, a very experimental novel which won the Goldsmiths Prize last year, which honors fiction that breaks the mold of conventional narrative, and this book really does that. It's a post-apocalyptic story, and it's written the first half of it is pretty traditional narrative style, but then the book gets all a bit wonky and the text becomes a bit crazy. I think it's a really immersive story, and excitingly inventive, but also it's a story that speaks a lot about our online culture and the way we sort of form our online identities. So even though it's this post-apocalyptic story, I think it speaks a lot about the world today. So there's that novel. I'm just going to go through first and talk about all the novels I've read, and then the novels that I haven't read and that I'm excited to read now. So the novel which I'm currently 3/4 of the way through and just really need to finish is Three Things About Elsie by Joanna Cannon. This is her second novel. I had read her first novel, The Trouble with Goats and Sheep, and she has a wonderful way of writing about communities and the way that communities can both support us and the way that we can get sort of lost in these small communities because we're not able to be fully truthful about who we are. And so it's about how people still maintain secrets and can largely remain unknown to their neighbors for a long time until a dramatic incident occurs. So I'm very much enjoying this novel and looking forward to finishing it. Then there is a great historical novel, Manhattan Beach by Jennifer Egan, which is set during World War II in New York City and involves a young woman who's working in the shipyards and wants to become a diver. It has some of the most beautiful underwater scenes I've ever read about in a novel. She just describes it so beautifully, how when she goes down into the water and it's this sort of whole world which is separated from the world above. So I highly recommend Jennifer Egan's book. And then there is When I Hit You by Meena Kandasamy. This was one of my favorite novels from last year. It's such a powerful look at domestic abuse and a woman who has to disentangle herself from a domestic abuse situation and leave her husband. And it's about the process of how she became trapped in this situation, but also the real struggle to get out of it when her family doesn't support her and she has to face sort of the judgment of the general public and people looking at her and thinking like, how could you, an intelligent feminist woman, get trapped into this situation? It's a really powerful novel. I highly recommend it. Then there is Elmet by Fiona Mozley, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize last year. And this was sort of the dark horse of the race. Like when it came up to the Booker Prize being announced, like a lot of people were rooting for it to win, even though she's a debut writer, and so like a lot of people hadn't heard of her before or this novel. But it's a really powerful story about a small family that lives in an isolated community and the way that their home is sort of invaded and taken over and taken from them. And it's about the culture clash between different groups in Britain today and the clash between different like economic groups. There are sort of the privileged and the working class, and this really dramatizes that struggle and that conflict. Then there is Arundhati Roy's long-awaited second novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, following up from her first novel, The God of Small Things. And this is a really long, ambitious novel, very complicated novel with many layers. Personally, I'm very happy that I've read this already because it's a challenging novel to read, I'm not gonna lie, but it is like it does have so much beautiful writing in it and really complex, interesting layers to it, but you really have to have patience with it because it's a story that goes in many different directions. But it is really fascinating. It was longlisted for the Booker Prize last year, and I'm glad to see it getting more attention because it might give people that extra push to actually try to read it, because it is a book that in the end I was really happy to have read, but yeah, it does take a lot of patience. Then there is a novel that I really wasn't expecting to see, even though like I hugely enjoyed this novel. It was like, I talked about it, I made a video about my favorite historical novels from last year, and I talked about it in that video. I think it's so good. It's See What I've Done by Sarah Schmidt, and in this she writes about the case of Lizzie Borden, who famously was accused of killing her parents, her father and her stepmother, with an axe. And she writes about the perspective of a few different characters, including Lizzie herself, all around that period, immediately after the bodies were found, and then the days afterwards. It's a really tense and psychologically insightful story, really good read. And then there is Sing, Unburied Sing by Jesmine Ward. This won the National Book Award, and it was on lots of people's lists last year of their favorite books of the year. I read it in December, and like I said before, like I enjoyed the novel. I think it's really beautifully written, and I was really emotionally moved in some places, but I just didn't like make my sort of like top novels of the year. I thought that there were some aspects of the story that were kind of clunky, and there's a sort of magical realist element to it which I felt wasn't really needed all the time and didn't like quite work all the time, particularly with the young daughter of the family. But I'd really like to hear other people's opinion about this novel, and if you thought it was really great, like let me know in the comments below. So those are all the books that I read, and then there's other ones which I'm looking forward to reading. There's only one novel on the list that I hadn't heard of at all, and that's Miss Burma by Charmaine Craig. Hadn't heard of this novel before, but it sounds really interesting. It takes place during the Civil War in Burma and is about a beauty queen who sort of comes to prominence during that time. And it's about the continuing colonial conflicts in Burma. So I'm looking forward to reading and discovering that. Then there is The Idiot by Elif Batuman. I saw this novel when it came out. It's quite a big novel, like Anna and I were talking about, and Anna was sort of hoping it would be on the list because she wanted an excuse to to have that push to like finish reading it. So now she has the excuse, so now I hope she does finish reading it, and I'm really excited to read this novel. Then there's another novel that Anna predicted, which is The Mermaid and Mrs Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower. I just hadn't read this novel, but it sounds really interesting, and it's one that I know a lot of people have been talking about on BookTube. There's also Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman, and this won the best debut novel at the Costa Book Awards. I think it's meant to be a novel that's like comic in some ways, but also very like serious and touching depiction of loneliness. So I'm very much looking forward to finally reading this. And then there is Homefire by Camilla Shamsi, which was longlisted for the Booker Prize last year. And I've been sort of hesitant to read this because I read a book by Camilla Shamsi before, and it didn't like totally connect with me, although I thought the writing was really beautiful. So I've been hesitant about picking this up, even though like a bunch of people I know who've read it and really enjoyed it. So I'm glad to have the excuse to read this novel now. And then finally, the 16th book on the list is The Trick of Time by Kit de Waal. I haven't read Kit de Waal's debut novel. This is her second novel, so I'm really looking forward to discovering her writing. She's a really interesting like writer and quite like sort of political figure almost, in that she's editing an anthology about working class writers and is always advocating for working class writers to have a voice. So that's really great. So those are the 16 novels on the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction. What do you think of the list? Have you read any of the books on the list? Are you particularly excited and happy to see any of the books on the list? Or what books on the list are you really looking forward to reading now? Do you think you'll take up the challenge of trying to read all of the long list? And what books were you hoping to see on the list that aren't on the list? Like personally, I'm really surprised not to see Sally Rooney on the list for her novel Conversations with Friends, and also Jamie Quattro for her novel Fire Sermon. That's not on the list. I was really expecting that. And probably most of all, there's no Ali Smith. No Ali Smith on the list. Oh my gosh, how did that happen? But you can never like predict what's going to happen with these prize lists, because obviously it just comes down to the judges and their tastes and what they decide is going to be on. But it's a really interesting, diverse group of books. I'm going to be so excited to read along and be discussing all these books with you in the upcoming months. So the winner for the prize will actually be announced on June 6th. So we have up until then to try to read these books. Let me know your reactions in the comments below, and let's have a chat about them. I'm so excited to start discussing them. So happy reading, everyone. I hope you have a great day. Bye. Speak to you soon.